Hello, and thanks for joining the final session of day one of the BU Virtual Conference. I'm Sara Richardson, Early Childhood Australia BU National Manager. I'm based here in Adelaide. With me today is Sonia Regan. Sonia's an independent consultant who has had many roles, all of them working with and alongside families in community development and co-design with children and young people, particularly in the area of disability. Sonia will tell you a bit more about herself a bit later. This is the final keynote, and we'll wrap up day one of the BU Virtual Conference, Exploring Empowerment. We've had lots of interesting conversations today and heard some really interesting things about empowerment. Remember to keep this chat going. You can use the hashtag BU Virtual so you can spread the word more broadly than just here. So in this session, Sonia will explore empowerment, particularly with a focus on partnerships with families. As I said, I'm joining from Adelaide, and I'd like to say ngā mani and acknowledge that I'm meeting on the land of the Kaurna people, Kaurna Yata, and I want to pay my respects to Kaurna elders past and present. And as you know, we're joining from all over the country, and I encourage you to share your own acknowledgement in the chat or however seems most appropriate for you. Also, if you've joined us all day, you'll know that at the end of the day, we want to say congratulations on making time for yourself and this professional development that you've been doing. I'm sure in reality, being online, you're probably juggling a number of things and coming to the end of the day, maybe some of the concepts that you've been listening and thinking about too. And some of you already be jumping ahead to think about, well, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to share this? We hope you've come away from today and from this session with some new ideas, feeling empowered to try some new things, and also probably some of you reaffirm that you're on track. We'd love to hear your thoughts throughout the session, so use the chat and the discussion box, and we'll have some polls. We also want to provide a safe space to discuss this information, and as part of making our virtual space safe, consider confidentiality and privacy. Remember sometimes that these conversations about mental health can trigger feelings, so on screen you'll have the contact details for services that you can find useful, and reach out for support if you need to. So again, if you've been with us all day, you'll know a bit about BU, and some of you might have already known about BU. So we're a national mental health initiative for educators, led by Beyond Blue and in partnership with Early Childhood Australia and Headspace. The great thing about BU, it's free and available to every educator, early learning service and school across Australia. BU really empowers educators to support children and young people's social and emotional wellbeing and their own mental health. And it's great to continue those conversations today, but also beyond today. BU offers educators professional learning, fact sheets, webinars and opportunities like this, as well as resources, and particularly consultants who can help you think about how you can make BU work for you in your site. We also offer learning communities, which is part of what today is as well, and also tools and processes to implement that whole learning approach to mental health and wellbeing. And if you want to know more, you can head over to our website and you'll find out some more there. So we're coming to the end of day one. Most of you now will know how to navigate around the portal and find your sessions. And you might want to start thinking about day two. So today as Jerry mentioned right at the beginning, we've had an opportunity for all of us together to reflect on a range of ideas about empowerment, thinking about what it is, about power, about taking care of our own wellbeing, and hearing different perspectives from educators in the field. And together we're building that online learning community where we're sharing, learning from and with each other, and working towards that BU vision of creating a mentally healthy generation. Tomorrow we'll be shifting gear to concurrent sessions for different audiences. So there'll be a greater focus on practical strategies to support, grow and build empowered communities. You'll hear from the BU team and others we work with, including educators and support agencies. Reminder, if you're having technical issues, you can use the chat function, and one of our moderators will be there to help you. So we'll get on with our final session, and I want to welcome Sonia. Sonia and I have connected professionally for a number of years. We were talking about that earlier, and I'm really keen to hear what Sonia's perspective will be about empowering partnerships with families. So I'll hand over to Sonia for her story.
Thank you, Sara. As Sara said, my name's Sonia Regan, and I am here today to talk about how we can build genuine, authentic partnerships with families that empower and help build those mentally healthy communities that you've been talking about today and will do again tomorrow. So the last 20 years, I have been working in a variety of roles, all with a focus on supporting families and organisations to create positive outcomes for children and young people. Now, this has been across a range of sectors. So this has included health, disability, education, community, early childhood, a little bit of child protection. So kind of a little bit of everything, but always with this focus on improving outcomes for children and young people and creating a better world and a better community at all levels. So throughout that time, I've also been navigating my own parenting journey. So I became a parent quite young. So I've sort of been going through this professional pathway and my parent pathway at the same time. And that's given me this really interesting kind of balance between parent and professional. What I've found is that as a professional, I can be more reflective as a parent. But as a parent, I can be more empathetic as a professional. So this has really sort of given me that two sides of the same coin and created a really nice balancing act that helps me, I think, in both parts of my life. Throughout both of those journeys, I've also had my own experiences with mental health, both in terms of my own personal mental health, my family, and more broadly as a carer of other family members. So that has really driven my passion for this idea of a mentally healthy community. And I think the opportunity to come here today brings all of those things together. The idea that we can work as professionals to empower families and create these mentally healthy communities. So yeah, that's kind of my journey and how it sort of led me here today, which yeah, hopefully we can navigate everything. Am I pressing the right button?
No, click the side one.
That one.
Yep.
Okay. Good start. All right. So I guess the first message around family partnerships is that we can do it better. I don't think we can ever get it exactly right, and I think there's always room for improvement. So what I'm going to cover today is some conversations about what doing it better looks like and how we can actually get there. We're also going to talk a little bit about why those partnerships matter and how they can lead us into a space of empowerment, both in terms of the families we work with, us as educators, and also the children and young people we're working with. Because it's so important and doing partnership well actually matters to what we do, we want to make sure that we have some really strong strategies and a really strong framework that sits around the way that we do this work. And that will actually, we'll kind of wrap up with some ideas in that space around how we can bring together what's most important to actually move those partnerships forward. So because these positive family partnerships are important because they help us build these foundations for mentally healthy communities. So I'm really interested about this idea that you've been talking today about empowerment. And I'd love to know what people think it feels like to be empowered. So if in a mentally healthy community, we are empowered, what does that actually feel like? How do we experience empowerment? So I think we've got a question. Yeah, so if you want to pop your ideas in the chat about what you think it feels like to be empowered. And I know that, when we observe families who feel empowered, families will report to us that they feel heard, they feel understood, and they feel like they're being listened to. We tend to see that these families will actually engage more positively in our services, more positively with professionals, both educators and external professionals as well. And we hear that educators who are feeling empowered are more open and curious. They're more willing to maybe take risks in their workplace and maybe ask questions and learn more. They're more satisfied in the workplace and more able to meet families where they're at. And as part of this, we also want to make sure that children and young people are feeling empowered. How are they part of these partnerships and part of this mentally healthy community? And what's their role in that? What does it feel like for them to be empowered? Okay, so so we know that it's important to feel empowered, because we know that that gives us all of these great things around being able to speak up and being able to feel like we have this positive well-being, that we're actually doing something meaningful. But how do we build those partnerships, and what are we actually talking about? So when we talk about a partnership, we're talking about something that is two-way, that we have this kind of duality, and we support each other's development. We support the learning and guidance of each other. We have this dance going on, right? We kind of, back and forth with the way that we share those ideas, and we work towards a common goal. And neither of us is an expert. So we value each other's contribution in that partnership, and neither of us actually considers the other more of an expert or less of an expert. Now, within this partnership, we also want to give each other space to be vulnerable, to actually say, I don't know the answer to this. I don't know what that means or what that could look like, but to feel safe in actually expressing that vulnerability. We also need to be able to give up some power to do that. So that vulnerability needs to be mutual. We need to actually both feel like we can give up some power and put ourselves in that vulnerable space. So I had a really interesting situation when my own son was quite young. I think he was about 2, and an educator approached me, actually probably younger. An educator approached me and said she was concerned about his development. And because we had at least the early stages of a partnership, we were able to work through that together. She wasn't really sure what this development thing was all about. She wasn't quite sure what direction we were headed. I knew, obviously, even less. So together, we actually navigated that pathway around seeking out some external supports, getting some assessments and some early intervention in place. And because we did that together, we created this really strong, trusting relationship where neither of us was an expert, neither of us had more or less investment in the situation, and we both were working towards this shared goal of working out what was going on and ensuring the best possible outcome for my son. That partnership then obviously supported him and supported me and empowered me to then move forward going into primary school, preschool, and his later years. Okay, so we might just quickly check the chat before we go into the next bit. We're all good? Okay, great. All right, so because it's really important for us to all be quite vulnerable in this space, one of the things that we need to consider is our humanism, I guess, that we all have shared experiences. We're all human. We all turn up each day with stuff going on. We all have baggage from our lives, and part of being able to commit to a partnership and invest in a partnership is that we become mindful and aware of these shared experiences and these kind of human life stories. So we're just going to jump into a poll and look at how we actually, what life experiences we have had recently and how these have impacted on our mental health, on the way that we engage with families, the way that we build these partnerships. So what I'm going to do is pop a slide, I guess it's a slide, with 20 different life experiences that you may or may not have experienced in the last 3 months. And I'm just going to ask you to kind of count them. So have a bit of a look at the slide, do a bit of a count, take off your socks if you need to, but do a bit of a count and work out how many of these have actually touched you personally. How many have actually been a part of your life? Now, just before we jump onto that slide, I just wanted to make a note that as has been mentioned already today, and I think Sara touched on it as well, is that look after yourself in this process. This is not an opportunity for you to beat up on yourself about all of the things that are going wrong. This is actually an opportunity for you to be reflective and mindful, and also to acknowledge that there is stuff that may impact our day-to-day work. So just be mindful and look after yourself going through this process as well. If you do a quick count, so I think there's 20 in total, and just select and just kind of go through and have a look whether you think you've experienced none, between 1 and 4, between 5 and 10, or perhaps more than 10.
Just having a look, something coming through. Between 1 and 4 is hitting the mark mostly for people, Sonia.
Yeah, great.
Some people have had more than 10.
Yep. And if we think about some of the families that we work with and some of the experiences that they may be having as well, we can start to see how there's some genuine human connection here, and this real shared experience that we're all, I mean, things like, the COVID pandemic has impacted all of us, really, hasn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's hard for that to have not influenced your life, whether or not you and your family have experienced COVID directly. The changes in our communities has been huge.
Apparently there's a question coming through.
Okay, we just got some questions. We'll just...
So the question is about, I don't want to feel like I can't see the forest for the trees, and sometimes I feel overwhelmed with the information and unsure about how to navigate.
Yeah, so, and sometimes these life experiences can actually cloud what's going on, and we do get really caught up in this. And I think one of the challenges when we're working with families is for us not to dive in there with them. That it's really important that we're aware of this, and we actually, we're empathetic and we're mindful of what's going on for them, but not that we actually get invested in what's going on for them. We may actually need to be seeking external support to actually manage some of this, so that we don't get caught up in it.
The other thing I was thinking about too, Sonia, is there's a mix there of that were you talking before, that personal and professional, and you can't separate them out. They are part of who you are, and they're part of our experience, and they all contribute and add. And it's interesting looking at the poll now, over 50% of people are saying between 5 and 10.
Yeah.
There are lots of things going on, and it is that overwhelming, can be overwhelming for yourself as well as, the other people around you too, and being mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and they can often feed into each other as well. So, there's certainly some here that, for example, you may have had a change in your job, and that has then led to, potentially some changes to your financial situation, or sometimes things can actually play off each other a little bit as well.
Yeah. I think we can probably close the poll now.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, I think it's what this shows us is that we all have, now we don't all tick all the boxes, and I'm not going to ask anyone to actually share which boxes they ticked, but just knowing that over 50% of people are actually experiencing multiple life factors, for want of a better way to describe them, that I think what that shows us is that we are all human, and we all do have stuff. Now, whether or not we can see how that stuff plays out in our workplace, it might depend. Some days it might show up more than others, and families are in the same situation. So families are experiencing, multiple factors, multiple things on that list. Then we can expect that they're probably having some challenges in showing up in a positive way as well. So we want to kind of try and find a place where we actually can have some empathy for each other, that we can see each other's points of view, and that we can have this sort of shared journey of being human and shared journey of, looking out for our children in that space. So because by being vulnerable and by identifying our shared humanity, we can actually start to get on the same page and in that kind of equal space, I guess. We want to make sure, so in terms of building partnerships, that's where we want to be, right? We want to be in that equal space. We want to both feel safe to be vulnerable, to actually kind of recognize that, perhaps today is not a good day for me to have this conversation. because something happened last night at home. Or perhaps, someone else might be a better person to have this conversation because, they're going through, they're having a good day and they're actually much stronger today than I am. So maybe that's actually going to work better. The other thing is recognizing that we all are wearing different hats. So I mentioned at the start that I'm both a parent and a professional, and I can't differentiate those. As Sara said, we can't differentiate one from the other. And, for people in regional communities, you may actually be wearing other hats in your interactions with families as well. You might also be the local footy coach or something like that. So you actually need to be able to have a space to be vulnerable and to go, you know what, I don't have all the answers, and that's okay. We're also not always very good at actually saying, I need help, I'm not okay, and I need help. Because we do feel like we have to kind of have this stoic kind of presentation, like I have all the answers, and we put up this curtain to sort of say that, I'm an expert and I can do this. But that's not always the best way to engage with parents and with families, because it creates that division and we don't have that kind of equal partnership, equal footing. Having said all of that, we also need to be really mindful, of course, of our professional boundaries, because we don't want to put ourselves in a position that actually jeopardizes our professionalism either. So we actually need to, and this is what I said before about not diving in, so not getting invested in the details, that knowing the scope of your role and knowing where to bring somebody else in. So for example, if you're not a counsellor and the family needs a counsellor, bring a counsellor in or refer them out to a counsellor, that we actually have some really clear kind of boundaries about what is and is not our roles. So you can be empathetic without actually going beyond that. And again, in that process, to look after yourself, to maintain your own well-being. I think the previous session, or one of the earlier sessions, was in relation to how we maintain our own well-being. And I think that's really important in that process as well, is to identify your strategies for self-care. So we know it's not easy. We know it can kind of, bring up some stuff for ourselves. But when we get it right, it's good. We can create these great communities that are mentally healthy and people feel empowered, and it's kind of, we're all making good decisions and we're getting better outcomes for the children and young people that we're working with. So what we start to see is we see the children and young people are engaging better in our classrooms or in our learning environments. They're showing more interest in learning, and they're displaying more positive behaviour. They are developing stronger social relationships, have stronger resilience and better mental health. And we start to see children reporting that they're feeling valued in our spaces and that they have a voice, that they can speak up and share their ideas, share their opinions. We also have families we start to see families kind of contributing and engaging in a more positive way. I've actually had some families that I've worked with and really developed these great partnerships with, that have actually used the skills that we have kind of crafted in that partnership to then go on and become leaders in their communities, or, take on workplace roles and things like that they wouldn't have done if we hadn't built their confidence and built their, empowered them really to actually step up and find their voice and find their value. And of course, as educators, being empowered means that we minimise burnout, we improve the work culture, we start to actually feel like we're making a difference for young people and for families. We can start to really get those rewards. And actually, this is why we work with children, right? We work with children because we want to see outcomes. And when we start to see children engaging in this way, we can really feel that sort of work satisfaction and those outcomes coming to life. So we're just going to jump into a video. Are you ready to play the video? Yep.
They say it takes a village to raise a child, and we know full well here that it's not just the educators on the floor here with the children. we need to be mindful of what's going on at home.
Schools are only there, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. We can't have eyes on students 24/7. We need to work in partnership. It has to be a collaboration space.
To set up a trusting relationship with the families, it allows us hopefully to put in preventative measures if necessary before something comes.
We meet with each family. We get to know a little bit about the family structure and organisation, as well as assessing what learning needs the child might have. When parents are prepared to talk to the school and share strategies and then try them at home so that we have some consistent approaches at both school and home, and also school listening to what the parents are doing at home so that we can copy some of those strategies as well. It's great for the children's mental health and wellbeing.
So these strategies that we use have benefited our families in a number of ways. I guess the most important part of that is we see more open communication around our families, both within their family unit and with us as educators.
They all love their children. They want to protect their young people, and when they know that you're there to help and support them do that, you can really work in partnership.
To create best practice partnerships, the best advice I think I would have would be to be well trained and well versed on the information that's available from the professionals. Second to that would be keep lines of communication open at all times, and that is a difficult thing to do sometimes because there are families who are perhaps not on the same page as we are here. However, if we dig in a little bit and we work a bit harder to get that really good line of communication open, it's very much well worth it.
Okay, so the video talks a lot about the importance of partnerships and how we kind of develop those partnerships with families. But I'm interested to know what you think it feels like to be in a partnership. So what do you think, Sara? What do you think it feels like to actually work in partnership? I know we've worked together before. What do you think that kind of feels like?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we asked that question before about what does it feel like to be empowered, and I'm thinking about, well, what's the difference between feeling empowered and feeling like I'm in a true, authentic partnership? Because there's a difference between feeling like you're asking me a question and I'm responding, and that's not a partnership. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in a partnership, I will feel like I can tell you what's going on for me or ask you a question with that vulnerability you were talking about. Like, mm-hmm. I don't know how to do this, or I'm not sure what to do, without feeling like there's going to be any judgment or anything like that. And then I think you also talked about that too, like finding that way forward. So not just having that conversation, but that partnership really feels like there's a future orientation maybe. What would you say?
Yeah, so I guess, and I guess when I feel like I'm in partnership, I feel like my ideas are of value, even if they're not fully formed. Sometimes I go into a conversation not really knowing how to put it together, and that's okay, that I can actually go in and just, pull bits of ideas together, and together we can kind of create something that I think, and as a way of I guess finding a solution, that we sort of do that in a creative way, almost like putting puzzle pieces together. Yeah. But it's not. I think it also feels kind of like I'm not alone. Like I'm not alone in whatever this problem is I'm trying to solve, that we're not alone in that. And I think that feels really reassuring, and I think helps with that sense of belonging and connection as well. Yeah.
And if I'm in a partnership with a teacher or an early childhood educator, the reason I'm in that partnership is because of my child, and so I want the focus to be on that. And the other thing I'm wondering about, though, and we're just going sideways a little bit, of course, but you and I are both able to we'll talk a lot, and that's going to be how we do that. But there are other people who don't do that. So I was thinking about matching the style too, or thinking about if there's parents who aren't so forthcoming or more reserved, what that partnership might be like for them, and how I might have to adjust my style to support them. And I know we're not talking about that yet, but yeah.
Yeah, well, and I guess it's that, kind of, so for example, some families verbal communication may not be their strong point. Yeah. And so to be able to match with them around, you don't want to be kind of talking at 100 miles a minute, and then the parent is kind of sitting back and just not really getting space to talk. So, so I think creating space for parents is also about creating the time, even beyond, you know, actually creating the emotional space. I think we also need to give them time to process and to actually meet us where we're up to. Yeah. Cool. All right. So once we've kind of identified these, what it feels like to be in partnership, right? So we know that being in partnership is something that we want to work towards, because we know that that's how we get things done. We know that we can't do a puzzle ourselves if someone else is holding some of the pieces. So we need to actually find a way to do this in a way that is effective. So how do we actually do that? What are the elements that we need? So this is the framework I was talking about before. So the first part of this is about knowledge. So we actually need to look at, does everyone in the partnership have the knowledge that they need to participate effectively in that partnership? So we're talking about families in terms of that perhaps they're not comfortable in our learning environment. Perhaps they didn't have a positive education experience themselves, in which case their level of knowledge may be way back here, and we may need to support them around building up some knowledge about what a positive learning environment looks like, because they haven't experienced that. So without that knowledge, they can't participate effectively in the partnership with us. We also need some knowledge about the family. So in the video, they talked about having knowledge of the child's developmental status, potentially something about the family's background. We need a little bit of that so that we know how to engage effectively. So for example, if we know that a grandparent is a primary carer, then we don't want to actually jump in and ask for mum and dad, you know, to kind of be in the room and have the conversation. So we need a little bit of knowledge to actually be respectful in that engagement. But we also need to be mindful that not everybody's going to be at the same level with that knowledge. And how do we actually make sure everyone can participate as effectively as possible? When we think about children and young people, if we bring them into the partnership as well, which of course we should, this is going to look a little bit different. So a child who's 3, the level of knowledge that they require to participate might be as simple as just knowing there is a partnership. Whereas if you're bringing a 15-year-old into the conversation, the knowledge that they need is more likely to be about their options for the future, or it might be about knowledge around their strengths. So we kind of start to think about different types of knowledge that we need to participate and make decisions within the partnership. And that will look different for each person in that partnership. Once we have some knowledge, then we can start to look at how we work in partnership to build each other's confidence. So we know that, you know, when we feel like we know something, we feel a little bit more confident to actually speak up and share our ideas. The challenge we have in this partnership space is that if we don't think that we're going to be heard, we come in a combative way. So this is where we see parents come in, and this is often the criticism we get, right, about developing partnerships with parents, is that parents just want to fight. They just come in and they argue about everything, or they come in and they challenge us. If we think about that a little bit differently, I mean, remembering, of course, this is their children, right? So as you said, this is why we're in partnership. But it's also about, do they feel recognised? Do they feel heard and valued within the partnership? Because I know for me that if I feel like I have to share my resume and I have to, you know, jump up and down to be heard, I'm going to come across as a bit more aggressive than if someone says, you have value and you matter, you are part of this, and let's do it together. So that idea of actually giving people and supporting, holding a place for people to develop that confidence, and that we support each other's kind of strength and capacity building in that space as well. And the third component is that we do feel supported, that we actually feel like we have support from each other, so within the partnership, but that we also feel more likely that we actually feel like we're likely to seek support, seek guidance and ask questions. So if a family's feeling like they're supported by you in the partnership, that they're more likely to come to you and actually have those conversations. And I think the same thing for educators, is educators also need to feel like they are being well supported by leadership, even by external providers, really, depending on the family situation. So we all need to feel like we have some supports around us, this kind of holding space for us and holding us accountable, but also holding us, I guess, is for want of a better way to put that. Because if we can do this well, if we can have shared knowledge within the partnership, we can have this shared knowledge, building confidence of each other, and in a supportive way where all parties are supported to participate in the partnership, that we can actually really start to see how that can create those mentally healthy, integrated, supportive communities. Okay, so what we've kind of gone through is this journey from how we actually, how we kind of look at partnerships. So what is a partnership? What is empowerment? And how we kind of move through developing a partnership that is genuine and authentic, and how that then creates empowerment and builds this sort of mentally healthy community. So in terms of the BU messaging and bringing it back to what this looks like in terms of BU support, how would you kind of recommend we sort of pull that together, Sara, around being able to look at those partnerships in that way within a BU community?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the focus for BU is around mental health, and knowing that mental health is that continuum of mental health where sometimes we have really great mental health and sometimes we have mental health challenges. And I was thinking about that as you were talking, like, these partnerships we have with families are not always going to be where there's an issue or where there's a concern for a child's mental health and well-being. It could be around opportunities where things are going well, and thinking about maximising and leveraging those opportunities to think about how do we build this mentally healthy community where as many people as possible feel empowered, take care of their own well-being, like we were talking about before in one of the previous sessions, having a plan for well-being and actually making a plan for this and being intentional about it. Ask me a question again, because I'm not sure if I answered it.
No, I guess I'm interested to know. I mean, I'm sort of looking at this in terms of what does it look like around specifically around how we build these partnerships and how those partnerships can empower both the children, the families, and the educators.
Yeah.
How do we then kind of be supported? So obviously, the third circle is around support. So the types of support that BU could offer us to be able to progress those partnerships and kind of wrap around those services.
Yeah. So I guess thank you for asking me again, because I went off on a tangent with something else that was in my head. And so obviously BU is a framework, and one of the elements is around partnerships with families. So BU acknowledges that this is a critical element to creating mentally healthy communities. And so there is professional learning which you can engage in as an individual, but I think it's the most difference is made where you decide as a whole school or as a whole learning community, early learning community, what that's going to be, what that's going to look like, and be intentional and plan for it, and use what the resources. There's fact sheets, there's planning tools that you can make use of to think about what you're going to do and talk about it together with your whole staff team. And you were talking before about the knowledge, what knowledge do we need to know, but what knowledge are we going to talk about with families and children, so that it isn't just our plan as educators, it's everybody's plan, so that we're all kind of aware of where we're heading with it, and clear and explicit about what that means.
Yeah, and because I guess one of the challenges is, so I've been talking about partnerships as though it's only two people, as though it's kind of an educator and a parent and nobody else. And I think in that context, it would be easy, right? We would have, this really easy kind of relationship. But the reality is that it's often it's an educator and 20 parents or 30 parents. So I guess what it's about is how do we create that culture of actually being there for that many people, really, isn't it? I mean, it's how do we create a culture that promotes that type of connection and relationship between educator and family on scale, that we want to do it, across the entire site and not just with one family.
Yeah.
And, like you say, the knowledge. I mean, I used the example before of potentially a family who haven't had a positive experience. And how do we actually then get them to that point? So, it may be that, we have like family nights, or we have, activities like that actually promote positive spaces so that we can start to move families through that journey. And there might be families who are already comfortable, but if we include them as well, we can help everybody get to that same point.
Yeah.
So everyone has an adequate amount of knowledge to participate in the partnership. So sometimes I think we think about this stuff too theoretically or too big picture, but it could be as simple as a movie night, on a Tuesday night, with families. So it could be something that's a little bit simpler.
Yeah, and so just the doing is really powerful.
Absolutely.
I think also that, and we talked about this in a previous session, is knowing that we come with particular views or perspectives or assumptions. And, it's interesting, you were talking about some families have knowledge in different layers. And for some of us, it's easier to engage with some families for all sorts of reasons. It's a more easy, natural fit, and there's other families where you don't want to, and it's challenging yourself and your own biases, but not just doing that on an individual level, but collectively doing that together. And that's where that support notion comes from. What is it that we want to do? How do we see families, and how do we, what do we, not just write it in your philosophy or write it in your statement, but what does it really mean here? And what does it look like? Because if you don't do that as well, you might have a movie night and then the same two parents come who can always come. And then you go, oh, we'll see, there we go. We won't do that again because it didn't work.
Yeah. And it might be, so if the movie night isn't working, it might be that we need to go back even further with that stuff. And it might need to be a one-to-one approach before we can actually get them to attend that. Yeah. So, and I mean, you'll know the families that you're working with and what that looks like for them. It may also be about using your connections in the broader community. So how do we actually, engage with community elders, for example, or other sort of role models in the community that can help bring those families to us and kind of, I guess, advocate for us as a safe space and say that this is somewhere you can go and be trusted.
I'm thinking one of the things too, and I can imagine people sitting there listening going, yeah, but I haven't got time for this because I've got so many other things in this crowded curriculum. And that's one of the things that I think is important and BU can help you with, is actually making time, carving out time and spend time thinking, talking, planning and doing to this. And it's interesting, one of the questions that's coming through is, how do you keep children at the centre of the partnership? And how do you, I'll read the question to make sure that I'm not just paraphrasing what they've just said, but how do you keep the voice of the child at the centre when working with families?
Yeah, I guess part of it, so it's probably two parts of that. So how do we keep the child at the centre? I think that comes back to that shared goal. So we think about what is a partnership. A partnership is this interaction where we have a shared goal. So the child is our shared goal, the outcome for the child. We all want the same thing. Parents, as much as we might think sometimes that parents are on a different track, they still want what's best for their child. They just may define what's best as different. Now, I think the voice of the child is kind of another layer of that, because to bring the child into the partnership in an authentic, genuine way, we actually do need to understand what it's like from the child's perspective. Now, for younger children, this can look a little bit different because we might actually be looking at things like child behaviour. We might be observing, how they're interacting with particular educators or in a particular environment. With older children, I think we can have a conversation. I think certainly by the time they're in primary school and into high school, we can be having a conversation. Where do you feel comfortable? Who's your go-to person? Who's your comfortable person? And I think children pretty young can identify who their person is, and I think that can help us really identify what it is about that person. So, for example, I only like the short teacher because the short teacher reminds me of my mum. Like, what are those things that are actually going on for kids? And sometimes it's that simple, and it's not something that's kind of glossy and theoretical. It can be something really simple and practical.
It's interesting. It makes me think about also going back to that conversation we had about shared experience. Just remembering the humanness of that with children as well as with their families, that this child has a particular view because that matters to them, and they've got stuff going on too.
Absolutely.
But having that genuine opportunity to even just talk about that.
Yeah.
I remember when I was working with it was this epiphany to me, which now just seems ridiculous. But what about if I just asked a parent what they valued? You were talking before about how do we keep the child at the centre. Well, of course we want the same thing, but we could be heading in different directions. And if I didn't ever stop and say, well, what's important to you? Because I'm busy showing them around the room and showing them this and showing them that, and they're not interested, and so I make assumptions that they don't care, but I haven't actually asked them yet. What is
and
it
what
that
they care is that your opening and closing times are at the right time, so that they can actually provide for their family, right?
So we're not ever at the cross, we're not crossing over, so we could keep talking forever.
I know we could we often do. But thank you for your questions. That's really useful. No, you're right, it's on that one.
So as we move into the final few minutes, I guess what we would be interested in is really thinking about what your next steps are, and what you are looking, what you're going to do, what people are going to do next. And like Sonia said, I think we've talked a lot about a number of things, and it's really easy to get too big. And sometimes just bringing it right back and just making one, even just to notice or to look at things slightly differently or to think about that shared experience could be the thing.
And I think if the only thing that you take away from this conversation is to be more mindful and empathetic, that families are ticking those boxes as well, I think that's that can be a really powerful place to start in engaging families.
So if we think about what that might look like in terms of BU, and like you were asking before about what BU is, one of the great resources that we have alongside the professional learning and the events and sessions that we have is that when you're participating in BU, you have a consultant to help you think about what that might look like in your service. And so you can connect in with a consultant. So that's a really great reason to register. You can also attend one of our sessions where you can have more conversations like this. So you can go on the website and register for a range of different topics and things like that that'll really help you explore these topics in a little bit more detail. And there are opportunities for ones that are more open, and you can come with whatever question you've got to kind of continue this conversation. And the people who work for BU want to talk about this all the time. So, this is what our work is. So we'd love to have you come along to some of those sessions and join in further conversations about that as well. And we've got a whole range of planning tools. I talked before about planning. I think there's a number of tools that you can use that will really help. Sometimes just people need a bit of structure to help them think about what next and how to manage that, I guess. So again, I guess thinking about wrapping up. I know we could keep talking. So if you really want to, as I said, learn more about this particular topic, you can come along to some sessions. But more generally, if you want to learn more about BU, as I said, register as a whole learning community to think about bringing mental health to everything you do, and then using that framework to really pay attention to particular things like family partnerships or some of the other elements of the framework. Just head onto our website and you can there's a range of things there to find out. Remember to connect with us on our socials, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, BU, YouTube as well. The video that we watched today is actually one of our BU videos, so you can find them on our YouTube channel as well as in the professional learning. You use the virtual conference hashtag BU virtual. So tomorrow, as we're heading into wrapping up today and heading into tomorrow, I think engaging in that way would be really great as well. Thank you. I keep forgetting that I need to. So I just guess as we come to the end of the session, I'd really like to thank everybody for coming today. Particularly want to say thank you to Sonia for having this chat. When I said to you, hey, let's do this, you're like, oh, okay. But Sonia brings a really important perspective around that shared experience and that bringing people at the centre of this. And I think, like you said, I think we could easily theorise about things, but making sure that doing relationships really well is actually at the heart of this work. And when people do feel empowered, which is why we ask you those two questions, what does it feel like to be empowered and what does it feel like to be in partnership, then I think we're working towards something that's really important, and that's kind of at the heart of your work as well. So I really want to thank everybody for coming today. I want to thank you for your engagement, for your questions, for your chat. I know the chat, weren't even looking at that today because we would have got lost in it, but I really want to thank you for joining in. Really want to commend all of the presenters for their presentations. We've had such an amazing range of things to listen to and think about and learn from today, and really looking forward to tomorrow, where we will delve into some more strategies based on early learning or school sectors, and so you can come along to some concurrent sessions as well. And thanks very much, and we'll see you all tomorrow.